building a better Bay Area, moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC7 News.
Hi there, I'm Kristen Z. You're watching Getting Answers live on ABC7. We ask experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. The Justice Department now says Saturday's mass shooting at a Buffalo, New York supermarket in a predominantly black neighborhood was motivated by a particular white supremacist ideology. Writings allegedly posted online by the 18-year-old white male suspect cited the Great Replacement theory. A professor who researches radicalization will join us to explain what that is, why has it taken hold, and what we can do about it. Also, the young Bay Area coder whose desire to keep her grandmother healthy led her to develop a medical reminder app at age 7. That's right, 7. We'll meet the girl and her mother. But first, is the FDA on the verge of approving a booster for 5 to 11-year-olds? And people who have recovered from COVID are now asking, how many times can you be reinfected? Joining us now to discuss these questions, UCSF infectious diseases specialist, Dr. Peter Chin-Hong. Dr. Chin-Hong, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Kristen. Thanks for having me on.
We do start with the sad news, though, because today the CDC finally made it official. More than 1 million people have died in the U.S. due to COVID. That's more than any other country in the world, isn't it?
Yes, when you look at all of the contemporary countries to the United States, 12, 13 of them were ranked amongst, we are actually dead last per 100,000 deaths in the world. And it really speaks to the fact that we were, not having a national strategy. We weren't aligning science and politics early on. And early on is when we see most of the deaths, although they've continued even in the era of Omicron. So you might have thought, well, maybe we got our act together with a new administration, but we're still ranking last in the developed world per 100,000, even in the Omicron era, as well as overall.
1 million is such a big number. It's almost hard to grasp mentally. Can you put that loss of life in perspective for us?
Yes, so we look at 9/11 as a very seminal event in this country. But if you look at the million lives lost so far, and the counter is still ticking, so this is not the end of the story yet. We can still make a happier end of the story. But it's almost like the death toll of 9/11 for almost a year, every day for almost a year.
Wow.
Or another way of putting it is taking the whole death count of World War II and the Civil War combined, and it's similar to what we're seeing now. And again, this is going to get worse than that because the deaths are still occurring.
A new analysis actually out today shows how many of those lives could have been prevented by vaccines, right? What does it say?
Yeah, so it says that, in a study from Brown University and Harvard at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, just in this year alone so far, in the first quarter of the year, more than 300,000 lives was saved by the vaccine. I think that when you look at overall in the pandemic, even in the first 2 years of the pandemic, 1 million lives, and California also has similar data. When you look at California data, these are all underestimates of the true impact because they don't take into account people's transmission potential that's stopped by the vaccine.
Right. All right. The variants that we have now, of course, we all know that people with vaccines and boosters can still get it. You just don't get the same severe cases, which is what you want to stay out of the hospital. But I want to ask you, a lot of people are now asking, look, I've gotten infected once. Am I good now? Or how many times can I actually get it again? Do we know?
Yes, so I mean, it's all speculation, but I'll give you a fact. So the fact right now is that in South Africa, where 90% of the population is immune, not from vaccines, mainly from natural infection, they're seeing a big surge in BA4 and BA5. We already have BA4 and 5 in this country. What it means is that a ton of people are getting reinfected. We have already seen and heard of colleagues who've gotten COVID more than once. So the estimate right now, some people believe, is that unless we update the vaccines, you'll expect it to be like the cold in terms of frequency. It's not going to be like influenza at one time of the year. It's going to be throughout. People may get 3 to 4 infections a year. But luckily, because of vaccines, we're not seeing as many deaths. We're not seeing as many people get ill enough to go to the hospital.
All right. I mean, if it's true that, many of us could get it several times a year, can we assume that you'd get similar symptoms and length of infection each time, or could it actually be very different?
Well, I think it's going to be different for different people. Even amongst vaccinated colleagues of mine, you've heard of people who get hit by a dump truck, like the worst flu, or people who have very minimal symptoms. So it's very, very different based on our own immune system. But again, for the future, we don't know. Right now, we are just talking about flavors of Omicron, BA1, BA2, 4, 5, etc. But we don't know what a new variant will bring. I think most people think it will still be mild symptoms for the people who are vaccinated. But right now, we have technology like pills, monoclonal antibodies, remdesivir, vaccines to keep people away from deaths. We can actually have a target of 0 deaths if we wanted to in this country.
Speaking of treatments, today I think the FDA actually gave the red light to a common antidepressant as a COVID treatment, right? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so people might have heard about this antidepressant or a medicine used for obsessive compulsive disorder called fluvoxamine. It's gotten a lot of attraction, particularly before Paxlovid came on board, because in some small studies, it showed that there was prevention of people going to the hospital, but mainly was prevention of people with short visits to the emergency room. So I think the FDA didn't give the green light, mainly because they weren't convinced of the outcomes. And personally speaking, it's probably because there are a lot more alternatives like Paxlovid available. Although the people who put forward this request to the FDA did talk about the fact that, we still need something that's easily available to the rest of the world. Yeah. This is in generic form, et cetera. So I think there are pros and cons to this approach.
All right. Whether it's this or anything else, do you ever advise people take it off label? Like, let's say you already had that for a different reason and you go, I'll just take this for COVID.
No, I think if we were in this country, I would definitely take Paxlovid many times over fluvoxamine. And the reason is that Paxlovid is an antiviral. It's made for a virus. Fluvoxamine is not really an anti-infective. It's not an antiviral. And we've never really been successful in the world of infectious diseases when we use another drug to treat an infection apart from the class that it was designed for.
Okay, another big piece of news today. The FDA seems like it's about to give approval to Pfizer's booster. This is for 5 to 11-year-olds, right? Walk us through the timeline, the dosage, and what you think about it.
Yeah, so first of all, only about 30% of Americans have immunized their 5 to 11-year-olds, despite having this shot be available for some time now. Right now, the FDA is looking at data showing that for Pfizer's booster shot, which is the same dose as the original 5 to 11 dose, which is about, 10 micrograms. So it's 1/3 the adult dose, given at least 5 months after the second, increasing antibodies by about 6 times. So it looks good immunologically. It probably is going to be the same for Omicron like the other vaccines. I think it's probably more needed for kids than adults, not only because, not necessarily because kids don't do as well with COVID, but because the dose is lower for the first 2 doses. So you might need this in kids more than ever to keep them away from the hospital.
I see. Okay, when do you think it'll actually get approved?
Well, as early as this week. So it's expected to go to the FDA tomorrow. On Thursday, they already set up a meeting with the CDC advisory board. So by Friday, maybe Dr. Walensky would give the final okay to this.
Got it. Okay. Look, we have a minute left to go, so I'm going to ask you about something the Warriors announced today, actually to us, newsrooms. They're asking journalists now to mask again when they're near players, like in the interview room, like near the court and around the team. But they're not asking that of fans coming to the arena. What do you make of that, and what is it saying?
I think it should be kind of a universal ask, just because journalists aren't necessarily different from fans per se. It should be a strong recommendation. I don't think we're going to see any mandates come on board per se, but journalists are not different from the general public. In fact, you can say that as a fan myself, I'd probably be more likely going to drink some beer and shout and scream with joy or not at a game, and therefore be a possible vector of transmission to others.
All right, Dr. Peter Chin-Kong, thank you so much for coming on. It was great talking with you. Appreciate it.
Same here, Kristen. Thank you.
Coming up next, writings by the accused mass shooter in Buffalo, New York, repeatedly cited a white supremacist ideology, the Great Replacement Theory. We'll learn more from a professor who studies issues surrounding violent extremism. That's next. All right, everybody, stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Until this past weekend, many people may not have heard of the phrase replacement theory, the white supremacist ideology embraced by the accused mass shooter in Buffalo who went on a spree to kill black people. But the theory has been tied to deadly violence for years. At the 2017 White Nationalist March in Charlottesville, Virginia, at a Pittsburgh synagogue in 2018, and at a Texas Walmart against Mexican in 2019. And now this. Joining us to help us understand where the ideology came from, where it's going, and why we should all be concerned, Kurt Braddock, assistant professor in the School of Communication at American University in Washington, D.C. Professor Braddock, thanks for joining us. Look, at the core, what is the Great Replacement Theory?
Great Replacement Theory has been around for quite some time, but it really came into fashion in the early 2010s. The basic argument is that white America, or when it was first originated, white Europe, is being immigrated out of existence. In the United States, the idea is that immigrants are coming to the United States and that whites will be the minority in the future, either through immigration or through increasing birth rates among non-whites. The theory goes that this is being planned by the powers that be to make whites in the United States less powerful.
All right, so is it still a fringe idea or is it mainstream now?
Well, for a long time, it existed on the fringe of the right, but I'm afraid to say that a lot of individuals, including elected officials on the right and major media figures like the Tucker Carlsons of the world, have mainstreamed it. It's been very well normalized in recent years. And whether this shooter was directly influenced by the Tucker Carlsons or the elected officials who espoused the theory, the theory has been normalized by these individuals to the point that this individual would have encountered them in places where they wouldn't have to go before.
So this particular gunman allegedly targeted blacks, but that is not the only group targeted, right? And the ideology itself, who does it target demographically?
Well, generally speaking, just non-whites. There's also a large element of anti-Semitism included in the theory as well, because in the original version of the theory, Jews were often behind the plans to breed and emigrate whites out of existence in Europe and the United States. But we see individuals on all blocks of the far right talking about whites being replaced by all kinds of minorities. So although this individual targeted Black Americans, it isn't limited to Black Americans.
So, in fact, a new poll shows nearly 1/3 of Americans actually worry about being replaced. What is driving that fear of immigrants? Who are the folks who are kind of impacted by that and then learn to embrace it?
Well, as I said, unfortunately, this has been very well normalized by far-right media and even more mainstream right-wing media and the elected officials. So although this theory circulates pretty heavily in certain spaces online, where it can be difficult to find in some of these spaces, not terribly difficult, but more difficult than in the mainstream. This kind of theory is being espoused nightly on cable news networks from the right. And when it's espoused to that kind of an audience, it's no surprise to see that that big a segment of the audience is afraid of these kinds of things, despite them not being true.
All right, so the idea currently has a pretty big platform on the sort of political front, legislative front, and also on media and social media. So then how would you stop its perpetuation then? How would you stop its spread?
Well, there are a few ways you can go about engaging in what I call counter messaging against this conspiracy theory and other kinds of conspiracy theories. And an area of research that I've looked into is something called attitudinal inoculation. For individuals who haven't gone down that rabbit hole yet, you essentially warn them that their beliefs and attitudes are at risk of changing toward this theory and give them counter arguments they need to push back against it. And the research that I've done at American University, both in the School of Communication and the Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab, shows that this can be an effective way of preventing persuasion by this conspiracy theory.
That's an interesting idea, because I think a lot of people would be afraid to bring it up, like fearing that you would introduce that idea to that person or push them towards it. But you're saying that's actually not the case. You should bring it up.
Especially in places like the United States, where we all very much value our autonomy and our ability to make our own decisions. If you tell people that, listen, we know you're not violent, we know you're not an extremist, but there are these individuals out there who want to use you to achieve their political goals. They're going to try to persuade you. And worse, people like you have been persuaded by these ideas before. It's not so much that you're raising the idea, but you're raising the perspective or the specter of threat to them, the idea that their beliefs and attitudes aren't as safe as they think they are. When we do that, not only do we help them defend against the idea itself, it shows that we're on their side. We want to help them build resilience against these kinds of ideas.
In terms of preventing this kind of idea from taking hold through social, look, this person live streamed it for a couple of minutes. Should there be more ways to prevent that? And I ask that question knowing full well there are headwinds, right? There are those, for example, Elon Musk, who's looking at buying Twitter, who say there should be less moderation, less clamping down of things on social. So how do you kind of deal with that?
Well, let me start by saying the idea of less moderation, we've seen that only leads to problems. That's not to say that all content should be moderated and immediately taken down. But every time we see time and time again on these social media platforms, when people are left to their own devices like the Wild West and there's no moderation, it devolves into hate mongering and meme sharing, often very racist, sexist, and extremist content. Something the platforms have gotten better at in recent years is what we call takedowns. When this content appears on the platforms, they have dedicated elements of the platforms to take the content down and keep an eye on it so it doesn't come back up. I think that's a useful element of preventing this from gaining any traction, but it can't be the only element. We also need to engage with the ideology as well.
Professor Braddock, look, these individual episodes, horrible, tragic, but on a broader level, what is the danger if this idea is left unfettered to grow?
My big fear, what keeps me up at night, is the normalization of these ideas, because I think without much pushback really, or any kind of evidence to the contrary, that words have power to influence violence, to motivate violence. And without trying to engage with this ideology and without pushing back against it, it'll continue to be normalized, which I fear will lead to more violence and more shootings like this one. Unfortunately, we say this is a few and far between type thing, but I think we're seeing again and again. El Paso, Buffalo, Pittsburgh a couple of years ago. This is happening again and again, and we can no longer look at it as a series of isolated incidents. This is all connected to a wider far-right ideology that's motivating these kinds of things. And if it takes hold, I fear we'll see more.
All right, Kurt Braddock, assistant professor in the School of Communication at American University. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
We are going to shift gears. I think this will put a smile on your face. A medical app created by a 7-year-old here in the Bay Area. We'll talk to her about the inspiration when we come back.
In commercial break.
All right, stick around. You definitely want to see this next story. We'll be right back.
Eight, 7, 6, 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
There are lots of brilliant coders in the Bay Area, but not many who can say they're 7 years old. A San Ramon girl has developed a potentially life-saving app, all to help her grandmother. Joining us now to share her app with us, Advi Vemula and her proud mom, Rupa Vemula. Hello, ladies.
Hi, Christy.
So good to see you. Abby, you are really 7? Really? But almost
Yes,
8, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
In
well
June.
then of course you'd be coding apps. No, I'm just kidding. Rupa, jump in when you want. This is an incredible story. Tell us, Abby, what is the name of your app?
My app name is Med Reminder.
Med Reminder. And what does it do?
It helps my grandma and people who are like her get reminders for their medicine and their doctor appointments.
Wow. Okay, what made you want to create this app? How did you get the idea?
I wanted to create this app especially for my grandmother because she's been suffering from a heart condition, and when she is FaceTiming on me, I noticed that she always misses taking her medicine because she's busy. Neither is she can't keep track of it.
Got it. So, Rupa, do you remember the day when she came to you and said, I'm making this, I'm doing it?
I actually, she was like thinking of, I mean, it was during pandemic when it was in early, like, you know, in 2020 when the pandemic hit, and she was so bored, like she was bored sitting at home, like not going out now, because she used to be in so many activities like swimming and gymnastics, and all of a sudden they're all cut off. And then she was like, Mom, I have to do something. This is not going to work with me. So she started like, you know, getting into doing some animations and all that stuff. And then she thought, okay, I will use all my coding knowledge and utilize my app knowledge and create something for her grandma. That's what she thought.
Wow, amazing. Okay, so Abby, walk us through, we're looking at pictures of the app. Tell us about some of the features that you really like on it.
I especially like how I designed it because there's so many colors to it. It makes it pop out very well.
Seriously, this is good UX UI there. I think it does make it very clear and it's user friendly. Does your grandmother use it now?
No, I'm keeping it as a surprise until
You'll visit her in June.
Yeah.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah.
Rupa, is this, where can I find this? Is it on the App Store or anything yet?
Not yet. We are going to release it soon. Now everything we tested it, and then it's all good. And she worked everything on Thunkable, and then it's going to be released soon.
So like on Samsung, on iPhone, like it's going to.
Yes, exactly. That's our idea.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Abby, what do you like about coding?
I like coding because it's just like when we create these apps, it's very real time. So, for example, one time my coding teacher, we had it in our class. We had to create a chat app, and when we can just keep chatting with our friends. And now I'm using it like I don't even want to delete that app.
Oh, Rupa, what do you think Abby will be or do professionally when she grows up? If she's already doing this now.
You want to say, Abby, what you want to be?
I want to be a computer teacher who teaches students coding, and I help them create amazing apps like how I created MedReminder.
Wow, that is fantastic. It's like spread the wealth, pass it on, right? Share the knowledge. Rupa, you must be so proud. I think, right? I mean, just amazing.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, she's 7 and she's going to be 8 soon. And she has so much potential. And then she loves being, on the screen and working on her activities. After every class, she always, make sure she completes her projects after each class and then submit to her teacher every day. And then she's very punctual, and then, she loves it. Yeah.
Well, Advi, congratulations, and Rupa, congratulations to you. Don't go away. We'll continue to chat on Facebook Live. Take a short break. All right, so I heard you already won an award for it. Is that right, Advi? What's the award?
It's 18.
It's 18 under 18.
I mean, in your case, they could even make it 8 under 8. Wow.
You bet, yeah.
So you've been coding, like, if you started during the pandemic, really just for like 2 years, right?
Yeah. Almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years. Are you self-taught, or you said you were taking a class? What's the class?
It's Byju's Future School.
Okay, so you've taken, what was the class, like Python, or I forgot to ask you, what language did you code this in?
It's block-based coding.
Is what?
Block-based coding.
Oh, block-based, okay. So what is the next class that you would take that you think you're interested in?
Probably Python, because at my after-school program, a teacher's daughter taught me a little bit of Python, so I think I got a little bit of the hang to it. So probably after block-based coding, I would move on to Python.
That seems like a good idea, right? I mean, Python's kind of a foundation. Rupa, what do you do? Are you in coding or tech or computer science?
No, I'm in civil engineering.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
so she's got a STEMmy brain from mom. That's awesome. That's awesome. But it's a totally different area. So she's going to be teaching you soon, right?
Yes, definitely.
So, Abby, what other apps have you created, or what other coding projects, I should say, do you want to tackle?
I think phases of the moon. So every single day it shows the phase of the moon and it writes a description. Once I did an image recognition app where once you click this camera button, when you click it, it takes a photo of you and then it writes the description of what it is.
That's
Like,
so
for example-
cool. I'm sorry. I think we're out of time for now, but congratulations. I cannot wait to download all your apps. I do hope you'll be teaching. Maybe one day I'll take a class from you. Take care, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen.
What's kind of sad?
Thank you so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. We'll be here every weekday at 3 on air and on live stream. See you tomorrow.